to Simpler. We are three pastors, husbands, and fathers on a journey to make life simpler by holding Jesus as the core for every belief and practice. This journey has shaped us to be more like Christ, freed us from the shame of failure, and encouraged us to a deeper love of our Lord and God. We invite you to join us in the discussions that have shaped and continue to shape our lives.
For those of you listening, if this part's on the podcast, but I call the tough ass, hard headed side of me, Ruperto, whatever. Like he gets those questions. He's like, look, you gotta work through this. You gotta shake yourself free from this stuff. And so like, there's a part of me.
Ryan, that's tush fault, by the way, not asphalt.
There's a part of me that appreciates.
You're such a tough tush. You're such a tush hole.
There's a part of me though that really appreciates it because I know where I want to be.
Right.
Yeah.
And
here's
part of that's the years of friendship.
Right.
And knowing that even though in this moment I might feel insecure or I might feel weak or stupid or whatever, there is something, and I say this to parents a lot, which is really stupid. I'm not calling you my parent, Micah, but I say this to parents a lot, like, because they're like, what do I do for my kid who's struggling? Or what do I do for my kid who's depressed? Or what do I do who is getting teased and made fun of and stuff? Like, I say, you continue to show up. Like, you continue to be stable in their life. Like, and there's something about stability that's so underrated. Like, and I'm talking specifically about stability in relationships and friendships.
Yeah.
That just the act of showing up for the friend of yours that's hurt and broken and insecure and fearful in that moment. Now, here's what's frustrating. If you're the person who's showing up for the friend in that moment, especially me, like if you're showing up for me in a moment where I'm living in my fear and insecurity, I'm not going to appreciate it in that moment because I don't have the ability to because your care in that moment feels like it's mocking me. Not that it is, but
it feels like it.
But I don't like me in that moment, so I can't really believe you do.
Yeah.
But tomorrow, when I'm seeing clearly, that's when you, having been consistent the day before, weighs for me. It matters for me. In the moment, it doesn't matter as much. And so if you're the person who's showing up for your friends over and over again, but you feel like, man, it doesn't seem to be helping, I promise you it does. They just haven't been able to process all the way through it yet. But it does matter. Because a lot of us like have people who should have shown up for us in our childhood but didn't. And that's what's shaping how we now view all of our relationships, which sucks. But typically speaking, your first 18 years are with your parents, barring something crazy happening. And so your formative years, if the people who were supposed to care for you and show up for you the most didn't, it's really hard not to carry that into your adulthood.
Absolutely. I saw a drawing from Winnie the Pooh. Who wrote Winnie the Pooh? A.A. Milne? Is that his name?
I think it was Mr. Pooh.
Mr. Pooh. Pooh wrote it. But anyway, it was...
Have you seen the original Winnie the Pooh dolls? They're
terrifying.
All that was based off of?
They're terrifying. Yeah. They didn't know how to make things cool in the 1800s or whatever, late 1800s, early 1900s. But it was same type of thing where Winnie the Pooh is just sitting on a log and Piglet walks up and he's like, how you doing? He goes, I'm having a tough day. He goes, okay, what do you want to talk about it? He goes, no, I don't want to talk about it. And he's like it seems pretty aggressive in the dialogue. And then Piglet clears a spot on the log and sits next to him. He goes, what are you doing? And he was like, well, I've had difficult days before and it's nice to have someone sit next to you to it, even if you don't talk the whole time. And so it says that Pooh looked over there and Piglet was just sitting there just kicking his feet on the log, just chilling. And he was like, I'm not going anywhere, man. I'm here beside you. And I was like, that's a really cool way to help structure some of those relationships for kids, even to kind of show like you don't have to fix it or necessily give the advice. You can just be there for somebody and literally just be present for somebody.
That would be a
and
really great thing to to show kids and say, look, this is what I'm doing for you. Like, I'm just here. We don't have to talk about it. We don't have to. It's also really good for 47-year-old people who who
go back and read Winnie the Pooh and you're like, that's what I need right now.
Thanks,
Thank you. Piglet, just be there for me, man. Is Piglet a boy or a girl? Now that I asked that question, I think he's a boy.
Trans?
I know, right? It always goes back to that. Anyway, let's step on over to the PC. Let's step on over to the PCC. Welcome to the Culture Corner, everybody. It's good to see you.
We're talking about the modern day Winnie the Pooh.
That's right. One of my favorite Winnie the Pooh releases was a cookbook called Cooking with Pooh. as well.
I remember that.
One of the best things ever. The Culture Corner today. I don't know if you guys have seen this yet, but they're finally releasing the sequel to Avatar. Have y'all seen this?
I saw the previews.
You know, I never saw the first one.
Okay, so
Really?
Did you see the first one?
Oh, totally.
So yeah, question for you: did you enjoy the first one?
I totally enjoyed
Are you
it.
excited for a sequel?
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, the reason I hesitate is like, for me with movies, it's like when there's another Ocean's movie coming out, or like another, like, I'm gonna get really excited if there's another like dumb movie like Transporter, like, you know, like a cheesy movie I like.
Yeah,
it's not
Avatar
dumb.
was like really good. But I was never like, oh, I wish there was another Avatar.
Yeah.
But I am excited about it, just not with the same like fervor I would be for a movie I like.
I completely agree.
They're trying to recapture all the records that they lost with Avengers.
I know that's what there's part of me that thinks that
with the animation stuff.
Yeah.
So when the movie came out, I remember them being like, "There's going to be 5 more movies, 4 or 5 movies total, something like that."
Oh, when it first, yes, when it first came out, they were saying that they were going to be like more.
Yeah. So they had known that it was going to be this big thing, and then I think they had begun the budgeting process for building the Pandora world at whichever Disney park that is. And apparently that's super cool because it has like the floating islands there that you can like, you walk in and you see all the stuff floating around and going around.
Floating.
It's their actual, you know, what do they call them? The Imagineers. They constructed it. And it's Disney property. But yeah, it's 13 years later that from the first one. And
oh, okay. I thought it was longer than that.
It feels longer, right?
Yeah.
But I felt the same way as you, Micah, that like, I felt like I should have liked it more because of how culture was like, isn't this amazing? Or how like, maybe not culture, just media was just like, this is the best thing ever, right?
It was amazing, like with what they could do then.
It was, and it was pushed like crazy. And then we saw it in 3D. And that was the first time I had seen a 3D movie that was like, where you didn't feel like stuff was coming at you. It felt like you were going into the movie, if that makes sense. So like, there's a scene where because the Avatar, I don't know, I forget what the tribe is called on Pandora, but the huge blue people, they're massive. They're like 13 feet tall. And so whenever the humans go there and they're like fighting, they're actually in these like Matrix bot things, but they have to like, what do they call these suits? Mecha robot suits.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen the movie.
To be that tall. And anyway, they closed down like the cockpit, and like I remember that closing down, watching
they
in 3D.
Can't breathe in the atmosphere there.
Yeah. And so like they're closing you in to go fight in your little human bot. So, and you felt like you were in there.
Humans were fighting the big blue people.
Sorry, I just ruined that for you.
No, I don't know. I mean, I know nothing about it.
That's not a spoiler.
That's okay. Yeah,
I thought they were helping the big blue people.
Yes,
there's one guy that helps the big blue people.
So think about humanity. I mean, there's
fights. I mean, like,
okay,
part of it, and they knew going in, it would be like going to a tribe that had never seen outsiders before. Like, there's going to be factions of the tribe that are
against it.
I'm trying not to ruin the movie for you.
I've heard
it's okay. I'm not going to see it.
I've heard people. Well, there's gonna be 5 more, man. Maybe you got to see it.
Yeah.
I saw a tweet the other day that was like, if Avatar 2 expects me to remember anything from Avatar 1, they can. Like, I forget, he cussed after that. I'm not going to say it, but yeah, they can just screw off, is what but fill in the blank. But yeah, 13. My initial.
I know what you mean, Pierce.
I know, right? My initial thought was, I wonder who wants this. But then I saw the teaser and I was like, well, this looks pretty cool. Like,
you mean who wants another Avatar?
Yeah, like, well, especially like for it to be like, we're gonna make 5 more movies.
They said 5.
5. Well, I don't know if it's 5. Let me rephrase that. I don't know if it's 5 total or like 4 more.
It's gonna be the next Land Before Time.
I know, man. It's just like boom, 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 and apparently
4 more would be the same thing.
Yes.
No, like,
yeah, sorry.
5
I mean 5 after this or 5 total. My bad. Yeah, I don't know which one it is, even though they're the same.
Is it 5 total or 4 more?
But I know which one is it, guys? That's the brain teaser for everybody. Make it simpler for me, please.
5.
Exactly. But I threw out like a Twitter poll. I was like, who's excited for this? And surprisingly, most people were. And I think that they will be able to. It's Disney that owns the property. They'll be able to. And it's.
Did they do it originally, Disney?
I don't know. It's James Cameron, but I forget what studio.
Less excited now.
It's just
going to be a bunch of like, woke crap now.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if they just bought the rights to use it for the theme park.
Oh, gotcha.
And then they don't actually own the. I wonder if maybe it's not their studio, but they just own the rights to the likeness, and that way, because I mean that would really highly encourage them to put some marketing behind it, though, so that people will come to the parks and experience the Pandora world. So either way, if it's their studio or not, they're definitely pumping
Doesn't mean I
into
won't watch it. It just means that I might complain about everything that was in it afterwards.
Absolutely.
That'll be a fun podcast we can talk about.
Yeah. I
still won't watch it. I'll refuse to watch it just so that I can stay here and be like, wait a minute.
What did they do?
People? Hold on.
Wait, what did they have? What did they do with their ponytails? That'll make more sense when you see it.
Whoa. Hey. 13 feet tall though, huh?
I know they're big. Well,
you don't know 13.
I don't know the exact number, but I feel like they were twice as tall as a man.
It's probably pretty close.
Yeah. At least 10 feet tall, I probably would say.
And my whole world is opening up.
Yeah, I know.
They look like Bobon.
We're probably going to look it up and it'll be like 9'6".
You don't know who Bobon is, do you?
I don't know. Sorry. So anyway, yeah,
did you see John Wick 3?
I did, yeah.
So he's a professional basketball player, plays for the Dallas Mavericks.
Is he the one that they fight in the library?
He's the tall dude.
Oh,
in the
dude, what a great fight scene!
That was such a good scene.
I was like on the edge of my seat. I think Hannah somebody wanted to talk to me. I was like, no,
shut up.
What's funny is he's like literally the nicest person in the NBA.
He's so intimidating.
Like he got this is last year sometime. He got called for a technical foul, like flagrant one or something, like a foul where you would like do something really harsh to somebody, but he wasn't trying to. And it caused this big uproar. He was like so upset that it was played as if he was being mean, that he has some kind of deal with this huge blanket company, like a blanket company that makes huge blankets.
Yeah.
Nice.
So he sent one of those huge blankets to the dude that he fouled. I was like, I'm sorry.
I didn't mean to do that, man. I wasn't even trying to. That's so funny. I don't really have much of a commentary on Avatar, except for I'm just surprised that there is as much support as there is, because I didn't see the weight of it beforehand, but I think that they're going to promote it well, and maybe hopefully it'll be a really cool movie. And I think that
it had so many movie records. So
it did,
it was a huge thing because it had tons of records.
Yeah, and I bet I need to do more research on that, because I bet it did kickstart a lot of the like quote unquote live action CGI movies that like feel live, but they're 99% animated. So like, I bet that did kickstart a lot of that, where like Jurassic Park helped bring in the world of CGI. I bet Avatar even helped like really make that more normative, that we can make these things look realistic. We can feel like you're a part of this world, and it doesn't feel so foreign to you. You're actually being immersed into it. Yeah, that's super interesting. So I just wonder, whenever they greenlight 4 more or 5 more movies, that's always interesting too, because are people going to get tired of it? Is it going to be exciting? Are you trying to make it an instant classic? Are you trying to make it more than it is?
I mean, like, again, I don't know the story. Does it feel like you can do 4 or 5 more movies?
100%.
I think so with the world. Yeah. The first movie stood alone on its own well.
The whole world there.
Okay. Yeah. And they began a lot of storylines you can pick up on in the first one, but I don't feel like the first one left you like needing more, if that made sense. It's kind of like what you were saying.
Some of the like actors to be younger?
That was the... I think they could, because that was the whole gist of the first one, is like there was this crazy interaction of a ton of CGI with real people.
Oh, okay.
And so like it wouldn't be like, I know you guys loved it. It wouldn't be like, what's his face, the old dude in Star Wars who came back, and that last one was a complete CGI.
And it was awkward. Yeah,
it was like they did a really, really good job with the CGI, but it was like obvious that it was CGI.
It still wasn't there.
Right.
Same thing.
It's pretty crazy because technology's changed so much.
Right.
Well, what's great? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
In this, to answer your question, is obviously the majority of it is CGI, so it doesn't look weird to have someone that is made look younger.
True. Whereas within Star Wars, it's a fully practical set. Everything's built, and you have one character, which is like you stand out more than anybody else. Yeah. Well, and what's great? Yeah, and they did.
I'd love it if like they did a CGI in a movie one time, but like did it just really poorly, like the very first CGI ever, like PlayStation games from the 90s where you're real blocky,
just 4 polygons walking in.
But everybody acts like it's real, like it's the real thing.
It's like Gumby.
Right?
The claymation in the middle
dude,
of it'd be so funny.
That would be awesome. Just to have like this really...
Did y'all ever watch that King Kong that was claymation?
Like the old school,
one? I saw clips from it,
I've seen clips from it, for sure. Yeah.
They're like, no! Yeah,
forced perspective. You have to do
exactly. Yeah.
Do you remember the Bug Express commercials that play sometimes before the movies, like Termite Todd?
Yes.
When Asher was really little, we went to a movie. He was like 4, and we went 4 or 5, and we went to a movie, And he was just like freaking out of that commercial. And then that night didn't want to go to bed. And we were like, what's wrong? And he was like, I don't want Termite Tom to get me, or Termite Todd. And I was like, buddy, it's just a guy in a costume. No, he was bigger than a house. I saw the commercial.
Did you not see the same thing I saw, Dad?
So I had to give my kids a lesson in forced perspective. Got one of their toy dinosaurs and put it up by the camera, and then had them go way to the back of the room and act like they were scared, just so my kid could go to sleep that night because of some cheesy.
That's funny.
It's so funny.
Termite Todd.
Poor Asher, man.
I know,
but
man.
he learned through those fears, man. He pushed
did.
past the birds. He pushed past Termite Todd. Like he's growing, man.
Yeah.
Ryan, what are we talking about today, dude?
Today we are talking about whether or not a Christian can be angry.
Are you kidding me?
Dang it! Shut up, Micah. I feel attacked. Yeah, so we want to talk a little bit about, can a Christian, should a Christian, would a Christian, could a Christian be angry? Is it okay for a Christian to be angry? If it is okay, what are the appropriate times to be angry?
But Ryan, can a Christian really be angry?
Well, actually, Pierce, the answer to that we think is yes, a Christian can be angry. And I think we start this conversation in Ephesians 4, where Paul says to the church there, be angry and do not sin. And so that right there, I think, has to be kind of our jumping off place, because there is an anger apparently that is not sinful. And we would argue also that there are times that God has anger or God has wrath. So even in the character of God, there is an anger exists that isn't sinful. I think the problem is that typically when we get angry, we want to justify our anger. And let me say it differently, because there are times I think our anger is justified. I think that most people I know always feel justified in their anger. And
they're looking for a means to justify their anger.
Yeah.
I would say, like, at the forefront, just a thought. I mean, this might be off, but I feel like if that is the case, you're probably wrong in your anger. In other words,
if you're looking to justify it.
Yeah. So like, what I mean is, if you get angry and feel bad about it and feel like you need to justify it, it was probably not the right thing to do.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
Because we could talk about some examples. I can think. It feels like Paul's very angry in Galatians about people who've come and preached another gospel.
Yeah,
I mean,
100%.
it's debatable. I get it. The text doesn't say, but he says
let
like,
them be anathema.
He says to hell, may they be condemned with the people. So like, it seems like he's at least he's very, very upset. And maybe that's a conversation we had, is like, what do we mean by anger? But it seems like Paul is angry or upset enough where we could at least potentially say he's angry, but he's never trying to explain to people like, here's why I was angry. He just says it because that's his take on them. So I think that's what I mean is, like, I feel like if you have to back up and go, well, I was angry because of this, this, and this. If you feel the need to justify it, there's a good chance, I would say at the least, it's probably not an okay place to be. If someone's preaching a different gospel and you lay into them, not someone who's like giving you thoughts on what the gospel is from like a timid viewpoint who just doesn't know any better, but someone who's like what we would call a false teacher, proclaiming something that is contrary to the gospel, and call them out on it. I can't imagine, at least maybe this is just me saying this is my personality. There wouldn't be a point when I would be like, oh man, I feel really bad that I hurt that dude's feelings.
Yeah.
I would just be like, you're preaching a different gospel. And this is like Jeremiah, I think, who's saying like, or it's similar, I guess. Like, his word is in my heart like a fire. It's
shut up in my bones.
I'm weary of holding it in. Like that's that's a prophet. Like, you look at the narrative of the prophets in the Old Testament, like they didn't come necessarily with anger, but I think you would say, like, some people might look at Nehemiah and go, dude, you were angry at those people. Because you're pulling the hair out of their heads for what they're doing. So regardless of how you define it, there's an action that we would potentially say today. I'll say this way. Here's what I mean. We are culturally uncomfortable with anger. Culturally.
Yes.
Not Christian culture, just across the board. We are culturally uncomfortable with anger. So when we read a story like Nehemiah, or Paul's calling out the false teachers, or when Peter and Jude calling them a bunch of bad names, we're culturally uncomfortable with that. I think because we've set a standard culturally that having any kind of like negative reaction like that, whether you call it anger or being overly upset, however you want to define it, we're uncomfortable with it. And so we say, like, generally it's wrong. And what we're kind of saying at this point is there seems to be some room for those kind of things within the scripture.
Right. Yeah. Well, and even when Jesus is flipping over the money tables, in the temple, I don't know that we can call it anger. The Bible doesn't, but you talked about this, Pierce, before we recorded today. You had talked about how it is said of Jesus in that section, zeal for your house will consume me. So it's a reference to the Old Testament. We talked about it before. You had mentioned that the New Testament author quotes the Old Testament saying, zeal for your house will consume me. And I think we're more comfortable with zeal than anger. Yeah. Zeal feels noble and passionate, but I don't think that zeal and anger have to be at odds with one another, because it's Paul's zeal for the gospel of Christ that makes him say, to hell with them if they preach a false gospel.
Yeah. I would be, at this point, comfortable tying those two things together. Like if I'm angry at, for lack of a better term, if I'm angry at something because I'm so zealous about the gospel, I don't know that, I feel like that's different. I don't know if we would say that's wrong compared to like, a lady cut me off in traffic on the loop and I'm angry about it. Like those are two completely different things. It's not my zeal for God or my zeal for the gospel. I can't imagine David standing up next to facing Goliath going, I'm just trying not to hurt your feelings in this. No, he seems pretty upset because this dude is standing up against God and his people, and he calls him, you uncircumcised Philistine. And so,
I'm going to give your flesh. Well, actually, never mind. Goliath says that to David.
It's a zeal for God that causes him to stand up like that. When Elijah on Mount Carmel is doing what he's doing in the contest and making fun of the prophets of Baal and Baal himself,
and not only that, after he's done with that,
he kills everybody,
all 450 of them. He chases them. The implication is he's the one who put him to death with the sword,
which is
wild. Then you have Samuel who hacks Agag in pieces.
Yeah,
I don't know if you remember
as an old man.
Story. Yeah. So in 1 Samuel, Saul has been asked to destroy this entire city. Long story short, he doesn't. Yeah. And one of the people he doesn't destroy is the king of the city. And Samuel goes, have King Agag brought to me. And the Bible says that Agag said to himself, surely the time of wrath is past, I'm okay now. And
because it's just the prophet.
Yeah. And Samuel hacks him to pieces. And we would, Micah, to your point, from the outside look, the Bible doesn't call that anger, but from outside looking in, we would say, man, that dude was angry.
Yeah.
And what's so far, Micah, and every single thing you've brought up, which I appreciate, every single situation has been something that has defied who God is or the gospel of God. And that's what's caused these people. Nehemiah's not just ripping hair out of people's beards just because. He's doing it because they have dishonored the name of Jesus.
That? He's got some kind of condition where he's like,
just run around.
All that dude's got
hair. there are people who pull out their hair and eat it, but Nehemiah's out of his own hair.
He's pulling out other people's hair.
And we're by no means saying like a zeal for God justifies now us killing people like Samuel did.
No.
But I think what we're saying is
or like the Crusades. We wouldn't
no, absolutely not. What we're saying is like we have to fight this cultural nuanced perspective that having any kind of like negative response towards somebody's wrong. Like we're uncomfortable. I'm saying this by experience. People are often uncomfortable with me in conversations because you've seen this, Pierce, probably even more than Ryan. Because usually when you're with me, they're talking to you first. But when you're with me,
people
Pierce,
pick on me when we're together and not you.
Pierce has seen those conversations where like someone's come at me. And I don't usually respond harshly unless someone comes at me. When someone comes at me and I respond in kind, and people are always like, man, were you so upset? And I was like, I wasn't upset. You're just uncomfortable with like upfront, tense, controversial conversations. And so like we're so averse to that culturally that I think have created this idea that like having any kind of negative response is wrong. I think people even paint Jesus as like this docile, timid dude who just took whatever he got.
Yeah.
But he's the guy who's like, if you read the narrative of the Gospels, it's funny. He's so ticked at the Pharisees at like some point in his ministry, they don't even say anything. They just show up and he starts calling them names.
Yeah.
You know,
like brood of vipers.
They just walk up. They're like, I haven't said anything yet. And he's like,
John the Baptist does the same thing. So John the Baptist is baptizing people along the Jordan.
And they're just out in the audience.
Pharisees show up and he says, who warned you, brood of vipers, to flee from the coming judgment? Like, they haven't done anything
he just
yet.
looks up and sees them. He's like,
She's like, oh, I see. But you know what? That's where the dad joke started with, well, here comes trouble. Don't let anybody hear. That's where the dad joke started. Yeah, I'm going to forever say that John the Baptist was the first
dad. What if he had a dad bod? Probably not. He didn't eat very.
Yeah.
So what we're at least saying is there at least is this premise that the zeal for God, potentially can bubble up to a place where we find ourselves upset or even angry, however you want to define it, at things that are in contrast to God.
Yeah.
Let me just throw another one in there. I would be, there's things that have happened in America right now where you see like schools doing crazy things with kids where they're like, there's been a few videos I've seen recently where little kids have been forced to read in class like pornographic material.
Wow.
There was just a book that was removed from a school in Florida because it was super pornographic, kind of a trans book, pornographic, and
explicit
pictures. Like Amazon even claimed it was 18 plus, and yet the school was at it in their library.
And then people are mad that
it was taken out.
Is what's the word that I want? Restricting the books, but that's not the word.
Censoring.
Yeah, removing it. So like, if that happened here in San Angelo, and I found out that like elementary school was making my kids read this book, I can't imagine I would show up at the school board and be like, well, I've just kind of got this issue.
No, you guys.
I would be the person on the news.
Yeah.
And part of that I get. Part of that is my personality. Like there are a lot of you listening that would approach that more timidly. I think
some of you might need to get a little more mad about things.
I think just, if I could admit a little bit of frustration, I kind of get sick of people dogging on me for being too harsh in moments when I feel like the reason that people feel like I'm too harsh is because they're uncomfortable with tension. I'm not being overly harsh. People just don't like it because they're not used to it.
Like
people are uncomfortable.
There's a cultural discomfort with that kind of expression.
Right. I think people were probably or were uncomfortable with things Jesus did. I think if culturally there would be people who are uncomfortable with how Paul handled. I think if Paul was preaching in our churches today, we would have an issue with him. We would 100%. Say he would get emails nonstop about how harsh he was being.
Well, yeah, I mean Galatians 5. If circumcision is of any value, then cut the whole thing off. And
he's not talking about the whole foreskin.
No,
I've heard that.
Yeah, and then in Philippians,
he's talking
3,
about the whole penis.
Right? Yeah, like he
just cut it off.
He's harsh.
Foreskin.
But like
it's because people are uncomfortable with the awkwardness of it.
Yeah, that's anyway. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there should be things that we're angry about. I don't know if you guys saw what happened in April at a Dallas Mavericks game. 15-year-old girl went to the restroom and never came back to her seat.
No.
And the dad that she was with her dad, and they looked for her, couldn't find her. The police at that point called it a runaway. The police are now being sued for some different things, but it was at that point called a runaway. They found later video footage of her being escorted off the property by a man. And 10 days later, they found nude photos of her online. There was a task force that,
oh my gosh,
that had her face, had her pictures, and they were looking for trafficked children. And they found her in Oklahoma 10 to 12 days later.
Was she okay?
But she'd been raped for 10 to 12 days.
But she wasn't dead.
No.
Sorry.
And
not okay, but I mean, like she was alive.
She's
is what
still
I meant
alive.
to ask.
And that should piss you off. That should make you
angry.
Would be
angry and upset. So the point being, what I'm saying is like I think that biblically there's a concept where zeal for God can cause you being overly upset or anger. And I think that, as to your point, as a parent or certain situations, as a husband, there's certain situations in life where I think we can experience the emotion of anger. It's also important to remember that anger is an emotion we experience. It's the state of mind that causes the emotion that starts to come into question. Like, am I angry that someone stole my kid and put him into child sex slavery? Because that's the state of mind. Like, I should not be okay with that.
No,
you know what I mean? And so
100%.
It's funny to me that we create this standard. Like, that's okay to be angry about, but it's not okay to be angry about someone who's preaching a false gospel.
Right.
I used to get crap all the time for calling out certain people when I preached, certain preachers for their false gospels. And okay, granted, maybe some of them potentially I didn't know all the nuances of what they were saying, and potentially it's too far, but I didn't feel like they were at least representing Jesus well, at the least.
Right.
So, but people are so offended by that. Like, why are you being so mean? It's just a weird cultural place to be when I think that Christians should be more often upset about things that are in contrast to the gospel. And I don't mean like being upset.
Well, I think that was key. Contrast to the gospel.
Yeah.
That's key.
And what I don't mean is like upset, like I hate all the people who disagree with me on politics. What I mean is like love someone enough to be willing to say, like, if someone's not preaching a false gospel, but let's just say you have a buddy who's not a believer that's explaining to you, his viewpoint on God that comes from, let's just say, for example, he grew up like a Mormon. I'm trying to think of something that's like a blatant disregard of different gospel.
Right.
You don't go into that conversation going, well, it's, that's just what you believe. I think there's a sense where we got to be a little more upset that this is the gospel people have believed. Like, love them enough to go, dude, this is not the same Jesus.
Yeah.
The Jesus you believe in is not the same Jesus. And I'm not saying be ungracious to them or be overly harsh. Be wise in how we have our conversations. But
yeah, that might be a different situation if it's a friend of yours than if it's a false teacher.
Totally different.
Yeah, because you're coming at them with like, my aim for you is to know Christ. But if it's a false teacher who's leading people astray, like the false shepherds or the wicked shepherds of the Old Testament who were destroying the sheep, and like, that's something to be pissed about.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there is an aspect of personality in this too.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, and maybe a good way to say it is if you're not someone who's prone towards like having raised emotions or conflict or anything like that, it's fine.
Yeah.
But just don't use your filter of how you think we should interact with other people as truth. Like, here's the only way to interact. So like when you hear me call out somebody, don't go, well, you were wrong because I'm uncomfortable with it.
Right.
Pierce, you're less likely probably to have that conversation than I am, even though you are very much willing to have that conversation.
Yeah.
You're just more of a peacemaker than I am.
Yeah.
So I think that you wouldn't come to me and go, dude, that felt like it was a little too much. What you said to me in the past is you said before, like, dude, it felt like really heavy. I didn't know where you was going. Where you were going.
I don't know where you was going there, boy.
But I wanted to wait and see where you were going.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean is like, we can't put our filter of what we're comfortable with in terms of like anger or being upset as a filter on what's okay in the scripture. Because the scripture seems to allude to this reality that there are situations in which a Christian can be angry.
Well, let's add this into the conversation as well. So the verse in Ephesians says, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. It's important to note that the first 3 chapters of Ephesians are reminding the church in Ephesus, Jews and Gentiles, that they are one in Christ. That there's no more, and this is big in chapter 2, the hostility that was between the two groups of people, Jews and Gentiles, has now been removed because of Christ. And then in chapter 6, he's going to remind them, we're not wrestling against each other. Like our fight isn't with each other. So when Paul says, be angry and do not sin, don't let the sun go down on your anger, Paul has in mind, bookend between chapters 2 and chapter 6, he has in mind this idea of unity in the church.
Yep.
And so one of the others.
So you're saying specifically anger between like brothers and sisters in Christ. Like, this is amongst the body.
Right. Yeah. And so one of the things that we want to bring to the table in talking about this conversation is we, sitting at this table here, we would argue that there are times that anger is sinful. There are times that it doesn't honor Jesus. And so a couple of thoughts on that. Proverbs 12:16 says, a fool's anger is known at once, but a prudent man overlooks an insult. So if you're someone who responds to every perceived wrong, this is kind of what you were talking about at the beginning of this, Micah. If you're someone who just automatically responds to every perceived personal injustice with anger and rage, probably there's something else going on in your heart. And then one other thought just kind of about that. So a fool's anger is known at once, but then Proverbs 29:11 says, a fool gives full vent to their rage, but a wise person brings calm. And so, or a wise person quietly holds it back. And so this is not in contradiction to what we were saying a second ago, like a wise person. Some of you are going to go, yeah, see, a wise person holds it back. The gospel has to matter more than anything else in the world. It has to. And if, like Micah said a moment ago, if you're going to be angry over the injustice that is done to children and people being kidnapped and sold into slavery, like if you're going to be angry over that, which is a good thing, we all would agree to be angry over. Like let's speak to those things and speak out against those things. But if you're going to be angry over that, you have to be angry over the mishandling of the gospel of Jesus. You have to, because the gospel matters more.
Unless it doesn't matter more to you.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, I think that's
I didn't want to pull back that curtain, but yes.
I think that's the tell. And I'm not even saying you're not saved. I think that there is an opportunity for us to care more about social issues than the gospel. And so if we're more angry, that's what I'm saying. If we're more angry about those other things and less angry, if we're like, it's okay in terms of like false gospels, then what we're actually saying is our value lies in cultural, societal norms as far as like what we think should be and shouldn't be.
Yeah. I mean, it's, again, not that those other things aren't offensive. They should be deeply offensive. But instead of, I think what people are going to do is they're going to want to go, oh, so you're saying I shouldn't be as offended about sex slavery? No. Be so offended about that and be more offended about the gospel.
So something that Proverbs seems, what was the first Proverbs verse you said?
A fool's anger is known at once, but a prudent man overlooks an insult. Proverbs 12:16.
It seems like those things are they're about yourself.
Yeah.
So anger about like an insult to you, anger about something that's a big deal to you, not anger about something that is like gospel centered. So like as a parent
in the context, right? It says the way of a fool is right in his own eyes. But a wise man listens to counsel. So a fool's anger is known at once.
This is a prideful anger.
Exactly.
So that's the difference, I think. Potentially, I mean, just a new thought as you said that is like there's this sense where like anger that's born out of a desire for the glory of God,
right,
is not an anger born out of like pride. I think that if I'm angry because someone said, Micah, you're not a real Mexican, or
that'd be a silly thing to be angry about. Yeah.
If I was, I'm trying to think of a legit thing. If I was angry because someone said, gosh, I don't even know, like this is how bad it is for me as an Enneagram 8. I can't even think about something that someone, because I care so little about what people have said about an insult. I don't know. What's something people have said about me?
I had no idea.
Yeah, you don't know either.
I'm trying to think of something that they could, I guess have like no ground on. Like if someone were to come at you about disc golf or something.
I know, Ryan, awkward conversation a couple years ago. Someone was very angry with me because they handled the situation very badly. And I called them a name over and over again.
Right.
And in retrospect, he probably would say I was angry.
Yeah.
But I wasn't. I was, I mean, opinion, but like I feel like people that are angry are expressing emotion, and maybe this is what the proverb is saying, without any kind of like a ability to like reserve it. People that are angry,
reflexive.
Yeah,
exactly.
So it's just a reflexive response.
Someone who's actually angry is probably, even angry about the gospel, is probably not going to be like going at it and then going, okay, wait a minute, I hear what you're saying. Like
Jesus flipping over tables and making the whip to drive the people out, like that was a calculated response and not a reflexive response.
Right. So if this guy's, he was upset because of something I was saying theologically, which I was just opening as a point of conversation.
Right.
So he was like, he was calling me out on the reason, or his rebuttal to me was like, I think you're wrong for this reason. And I kept, we were talking about this before the podcast, I kept questioning the foundation of why he was saying it. And he took it as an offense. And so then he started coming at me.
Yeah.
Which is never good. I just don't respond well when people come at me.
And to your point earlier, Micah, like some people are going to listen to this podcast and go, man, Micah, you should respond differently. You should react differently. And I think for those of you who are listening who think you might have that kind of a response, a couple of things. One, being firm or direct is, biblically, you can't make a case against it. Like you just can't,
Yeah.
And some people are going to have different personalities than others. So Micah and I joke about this, and you've probably heard us mention this on the podcast before, but Micah alluded a moment ago to Nehemiah angry at these people who were sinning against God, and Nehemiah is ripping out their beards. What you might not know is that at the exact same time, his contemporary Ezra is angry over the same sin that these people are committing, and Ezra's ripping out his own beard. And so Micah's and Nehemiah, I'm definitely an Ezra. I'm going to be way more... my anger is going to be directed more at myself.
That's why you can grow a beard and I can't.
Yeah, my anger is going to be directed more at myself than at someone else. But we can't look at the text and say that either Ezra or Nehemiah are wrong.
No.
They're both different men who are serving God, who are grief-stricken and angry over this same sin, and they had different responses to it. But
same goal.
Yeah, same goal.
Purpose.
And so don't condemn someone's personality because it's not your own.
You can question. I think that the response to me, for example, if you guys ever thought like, man, Micah, you were angry, I think after this conversation, maybe the question for me would be that you guys could ask me is like, was that done out of pride?
Yeah.
Or
was that from a personal place or a zeal for God?
And I think even the same question can be asked to the person who is thinking that that you're angry, if that makes sense. So like, I think that, hey, I think more often than not, people are afraid to ask those questions either to themselves or to the people who, from their perspective, were hurt, because you don't want to ask those questions to somebody who's hurt in our culture, because it seems like you're continuing the attack. But I think the question needs to be asked, like, did you take that personally out of pride? I think that's another thing as well that should be asked, because what happens is, like, use the example you brought up a second ago. I don't know exactly what you're talking about, but somebody brought up an issue or brought up a theological point. You asked questions. You asked questions, and therefore at that point it switched from I'm making a point to now it's personal. Now everything you said after that, was a personal attack because of their because from their perspective it was all personal from that point on. But that wasn't how the conversation began, and that wasn't your point at all. I've been watching a lot of Gordon Ramsay stuff, and I think that he is a good.
Because he looks angry.
He looks angry all the time. What's funny is watching these things where he'll go into a kitchen and get really mad about the state of the kitchen and be like, "This kitchen needs to be fixed." And obviously, I feel like it's amped up for TV, but
100%.
But like get really intense about it, and then the people involved are like, "Well, screw you, man!" And they get really intense about they take it all personally from there on out. It's just a personal attack. What he's saying is like, no, let's clean up your kitchen. Let's get better. Like, what are you doing? Like, get your act together. Exactly.
Get your act together.
Get your act together. Get your tush together. But I think that culturally, because people are so uncomfortable with it culturally, it makes good entertainment as well from that standpoint.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, because have you watched how he reacts to the kid chefs versus the adult chefs?
I love it.
And the whole difference in his response, I think, because he's responding to the pride of the adults, and he's responding to the brokenness of the kids.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know,
because for him, it's not personal.
It's not personal.
It's about the cooking.
Okay,
and so
I think that's huge. Yeah, recognizing that, because this is a cultural example that has nothing to do with Christianity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Maybe that's a good example to understand our tendencies when we feel like it's a personal affront. Our tendency probably is to get defensive, and maybe that produces anger. But the kind of anger Proverbs is talking about there, like warning against that. It is a self concern kind of anger.
Well, and so the anger, the fool's anger is known at once. I think we could tie that to 1 Corinthians 13, where it says love is not easily angered. And so clearly the fool is easily angered.
Yeah.
And I think there's even something about that in, I forget if it's Timothy or Titus, both of them talk about the elder, but like he's not given over to anger. So like the idea being that the overseer isn't given to anger like a fool would be.
Right.
So, I mean,
I think I used to be that way.
Given to anger?
I think in college I was easily angered. And this was a time when God was breaking me of my pride. And I think that was the shift for me. Like, I think I can notice now, like looking back, the difference in my response. Like now I can respond to someone from even coming at me. I'm going to come back at them, but not from a perspective of like, now I'm emotionally charged.
Right.
I'm just going to come back at them like, well, you said this, then, you know, but I think before, without giving you guys all the details of what God did to break my pride, it was it sucked. But I think that's what it was. I think I was
months and months of diarrhea, wasn't it?
No, but that would have done it.
That'd have been the trick. Yeah.
God done. Sorry, God. Sorry. God just speaks to you and is like, look, you're going to poop 16 times a day until you get over this.
Figure it out.
I think
that's why I went to India.
I bet that's the correlation is easily angered is whether you know it or not is probably rooted in pride.
Yeah. So it's not that
I would drop the probably.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it's what sucks is like because culture has such an issue with it, anger is always going to be the villain instead of pride being the villain. That's what I hate so much about it.
Good.
And so like it's kind of what we say or what we say about marriage as well is that people want to say that marriage is hard, but no, that may have been a means for you to see how prideful you were. That may have been a means for you to see that you don't handle this situation very well. And that situation is hard. May it be tension or may it be whatever within the marriage, but you're making it an all-encompassing marriage thing. You're saying marriage is hard.
The problem
because
you're
of
saying
this.
The problem's marriage instead of recognizing that there's pride in you that's making the marriage hard.
Yeah,
absolutely. And so we have a culture that says things like calm down. We have a culture that pushes this type of mentality. And then when you
calm and carry on.
Exactly. Where you have like any sort of outburst or any sort of
although that was a World War II.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Any sort of like outburst is probably too strong, but like fueled
emotional response.
Yeah, emotional response. You have any sort of emotional response, that is in itself wrong. But I think the question is, where's it coming from? Is this coming from a place of pride, or is this coming from a place that's rooted in what you had said earlier, Ryan, of like the most important thing, the gospel, like rooted in truth.
To that point, Pierce, even in Ephesians, when he says, be angry and do not sin, or do not let the sun go down in your anger.
Yeah, that's all one thought.
Yeah.
Is probably an acknowledgement that even in the body of Christ, that there are these times when you might experience the emotion of anger. And I think he's talking about how to deal with it.
Yeah.
This isn't a commentary on should you be angry, or what I mean is, should you feel angry or not, experience the emotion of anger or not. What he's saying is like, I think he's acknowledging that happens. And so how you respond to it. Because my assumption from our conversation now, this is kind of a new thought for me, is if it's rooted in pride, it will be harder to let go of.
Right.
If it's rooted
the instruction in Ephesians is don't let the sun go down.
Which I think
you're not holding on
to. Yeah. And then this like zealous anger, if you will, or zeal for God that produces, for lack of a better term, because we don't know these situations are anger, but like when Paul's upset or angry at the false teachers in Galatians, there is no commentary on that as far as like, don't let the sun go down in your anger.
Right.
My guess is probably because that's not an anger that lasts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of like, I can't imagine that. I mean, he might be like still upset that they're preaching the false gospel, but this isn't, he's not experiencing that emotion out of pride is what I mean. I think what maybe Paul's talking about, don't let the sun go down in your anger, is that causes division.
Yeah.
When you hold on to that emotion of anger that's born out of pride, then what happens is it breaks relationships with people.
Absolutely.
Paul doesn't care about breaking a relationship with the false teachers.
No, not at all.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
It's like it doesn't matter that he's upset that they're preaching a false gospel in terms of relationship, because the goal isn't to maintain a relationship. The goal is to call out people who are preaching a false gospel.
Right.
But amongst the body in those relationships, it matters that you hold on to your anger, because now you break relationships.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, and one of the things that I think is interesting, I wrote about this in Love Notes back in 2008, is that, so love is not easily angered. And one of the things that I considered was the stoning of Stephen in Acts 7 at the end of Acts 7 in the beginning of chapter 8.
That was chapter 4, verse 20.
Was it?
I'm just joking.
Oh man, that was a bad joke. And so like Stephen has these guys pursuing him. They drag him outside of the city. They pick up rocks. They're stoning him to death. And it says that he prayed for them and said, Father, don't hold this sin against them. Almost word for word what Christ prayed for the people crucifying him.
Yeah.
And so here was a situation where Stephen wasn't even angry over the fact that he was being martyred. His only concern in this moment was to represent the gospel, you know, and
Acts, when the disciples get put in jail and then beaten, and then they say, go out and don't talk about Jesus anymore. It says they left rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer for the name. Yeah. Like I think this is the whole contrast.
They're not angry at these people.
No, and there's not even a moment of experiencing the feeling of anger.
No, these are people.
It's the opposite. It's the contrast. It's rejoicing.
Yeah, that they're suffering like Christ suffered. So there's this interesting thing. Like these aren't false teachers,
right?
The people who told them no longer don't preach in the name of Jesus anymore aren't necessarily false
No, we wouldn't
teachers.
call them false teachers. Are I think biblically or in the New Testament are people who are coming into the church teaching things that are contrary to the gospel.
And these were people who didn't know the truth, and because they didn't know the truth, they persecuted the disciples like Christ was persecuted, and they're going, all right, cool, we're on the right track, you know, and so it's interesting that like it's very difficult to make a biblical case. I think Micah did this really well at the beginning of this podcast, and we've continued to reiterate it, but it's difficult to make a case that anger for self is justified, or at least it's not justified as much. It'd be a lot harder to justify, but anger over a mishandling of the gospel is easy to come at from a biblical perspective and say, here's something I should be angry over.
Or at the least, if you experience anger over something that has to do with self, like if someone says something harsh to you and you feel anger over what they said, Paul's instruction seems to be
deal with it.
Don't let the sun go down on your anger, which is maybe a commentary. That might be some wisdom commentary for people who aren't willing to deal with conflict.
True. Yeah.
You know, I think that like Ryan, in the times we've done marriage counseling, there's times where we've heard people say, I've just held on to this for all these years.
Right.
And I think this is what Paul's talking about. Like if you hold on to it because you're, for whatever reason, not willing to actually deal with the person who made you angry or deal with the situation that made you angry. And because of that, it stores up, and it's something that probably brews.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. When if the perspective is shifted to this is for the glorification of God, this is to preserve the unity that we have as brothers and sisters, then hopefully in a lot of those situations, the emotion or the guilt, whatever it may be, kind of you said, whatever it may be, can be minimized so that better goal of Christ is elevated, if that makes sense. Put that in the forefront.
Willing to put yourself aside. So like, I get it. There are times, I say I get it. I understand that this happens. There are times when people are so hurt by something somebody else says or does that the initial response is, I just want to be removed from that person completely.
Right.
And I think what Paul's admitting or acknowledging is that if it's anger that causes you to do that, you need to actually deal with it. Yeah. Don't let it just sit and fester and brew. I mean, what are you risking? And that's my question. It's like, what are you risking? You're already upset. Like, what are you risking? You'll be more upset. Like, it's a self-preservation mindset.
It is self-preservation. And because the unity of the body, John 17, Jesus prayed that the body would be unified as he and the Father are unified. That the unity of the believers is an indication to the world of that we belong to Christ. Yeah. Jesus says in John 13, by a new commandment I give you, that you love one another. By this, all men will know that you're my disciples, that you love one another. And so if we allow anger to be pervasive between believers, this is a gospel issue then, because we are misrepresenting God to the world. Right. And so be angry if you need to be angry, if there's something that's amiss. What's interesting is Ephesians doesn't even qualify what the anger's for. It doesn't say that it's gospel anger or whatever, but be angry. If you got to be angry, but don't sin and seek unity.
Yeah.
So like,
and deal with it quick.
And that will really push forward. I think the heart behind John 13 is that like they'll see that unity played out, that there's still the reality of those emotions, but what do you do with those emotions? Right. And so what they're saying in those moments, we live in such a world that says you're justified to be angry. You need to lash out. You need to do this. You need to make changes. Whereas preserving the unity of Christ is saying, no, that doesn't matter. What matters is Jesus. What matters is the gospel. I'm pushing me aside. And so the world can better see or continue to see that love proclaimed by preserving that unity. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if there's much more to say about it. Keep going.
I'm sure there's probably a lot more to say about it, but I think this is you're welcome for everybody who's joining us. I feel like our podcasts lately have been more so like we're figuring stuff out as we talk, which is not the intention of these, but I think it hopefully
it just
clarifies our language.
Like my hope is that you guys listening can join us on this journey. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because
and message us and tell us what verse did we forget to consider, what situation from the scripture are we
not
talking about.
There's so many of these things we have just always had, not just us, in general, as people, as believers, have just always had thoughts on. And I think it's important for us to open these conversations so that we can consider them more intensely with the purpose of understanding better how to represent Jesus. This isn't about like us being better people. This is about us.
Yeah. that might be the result, but if that's our aim, if our aim is to be better people,
in terms of better representations of Jesus, 100%. I'm in on that, but not like I'm a better version of me.
Yeah, just a moralistic case. That's
I've heard someone say that's what the point of Jesus coming was, is to make us better people, like better versions of us. And to that, I say you are stupid.
It's dumb. Yeah,
that cheapens the gospel.
It really does. Yeah, Christ didn't come to build us up, but for us to die with him.
I'd be interested to hear it, like a really good case.
Yeah.
Give me a call.
Yeah,
which means no one's going to call.
And if what you mean by better versions of us is you mean Christ likeness, then okay, but maybe change your language.
But that's not what I've heard.
Yeah, right.
So that's a whole tangent. My bad. We could not go. I don't know what, but like the goal is to be better representations of the gospel.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. And pursuing that through the word of God, through community, like that will be a result of that.
Right.
Is seeking out that truth, cleaning up that language, figuring out
which is why we have these conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so thankful that you guys watching and listening could be a part of that, and highly encourage you to get some people around you as well to the way that it works in my mind is view each other completely through the lens of Christ, so that if you bring up something that sounds silly as you're working through it, you're able to say like, well, this person's stupid or this. You're not saying this person's stupid or this person's offending me. You're saying, I know who you are in Jesus. Walk me through that some more. Or say, that's dumb. Look at this verse. Or let's talk to somebody about that. Let's bring in somebody else. Exactly. It's a conversation based upon the groundwork of what Christ has accomplished and what Christ has done.
You're not angry because someone disagrees with you.
Exactly. Yeah. You're not, holding everything so personally, man. I think that I forget how y'all phrase this. Becoming better people. There were so many people that I knew in college that like, God would shape them, or like part of their testimony, probably the best way to say it, through something. Like they'd be shaped through something or changed through something, and then they would get so fixated on certain language. And so to use that language of becoming a better me, well, God just showed me it was about becoming a better me. And then I would realize through talking with them that what they meant was what we had said of like pursuing Jesus and therefore Christ likeness coming through that.
They just said it badly.
I know. And then I would be like, I think a better way of saying that might be this way. And they're like, why do you got to do that, man? Why do you have to take this from me? I'm like, no, it's not personal. What are you doing? No. So
this is the generation where everybody got trophies.
Yeah, exactly.
My truth is my truth.
Exactly right.
Off. It doesn't matter. Okay.
Yeah,
it does,
and that should not be in
frustrate me a little bit because, like, it matters what we say. Like, if you say it's a better version of me,
the world says that. The world without Christ says, "Hey, we need to be better." People.
Exactly,
and we're set apart.
That's the issue. Is it sounds exactly like what the world's saying. And so, if we as Christians mean when we say a better version of me, if what we mean is we need to be more like Christ, just say that.
Yeah,
just say we need to be more
say
like
that.
Christ.
Just use biblical language, or don't get so offended when community is helping you shape that. Like a brother or sister in Christ is helping you shape that more clearly, because man, it's a Christian life has told us anything. It's not about us. Like we come before the cross and say, I can't do it, and so we put our hands up and surrender before the Lord and let him work. And so for us to try to have a semblance of that selfishness and pride within Christian life is such a contrast. Like they do not flow together. And so let's, with humility and unity, work together and grow together and see Christ likeness within the body. Be angry and do not sin. Yeah. Anger, I don't know. Hopefully that's freeing for some of you guys listening and watching, that anger in itself is not innately wrong. Where is that anger coming from? And then how are you acting upon it? Yeah. And so it's not all anger is wrong. You're a bad person for feeling anger, but within the midst of that, where's it coming from and what do you do with it? Like,
and then are you Ezra or Nehemiah? I'm curious. Are you ripping out other people's beards or your own?
You know what's so funny
in general, like our listeners.
Oh, whose beards am I ripping out?
Yeah.
I do want to know.
I think you're Ezra.
Which one's Ezra again?
No, rips out his own beard.
Yeah,
I think you will rip out somebody else's beard.
I think that's what it is.
I don't think you're willing to. I just don't think that's your default.
No, it's definitely not. And I think what's funny is the more that I've hung out with you guys and as we've been friends and done ministry together, I'm like, I wonder if I'm just the middle ground kind of between some of it.
We're the more extremes.
Exactly. Because there will be times where I'll sit there at night and be like, but what about that thing you said in third grade? I'll like beat myself up for it. But then there's most of the time there's the days where I just have open TikTok and I go just pass out and fall asleep.
That's like Micah.
Exactly. So like that's a good example for the two of it. So just finding the middle ground. I'll rip out some of mine, rip out some of theirs, and then swap them.
If I can watch disc golf for 5 minutes when I lay in bed, I'm out. No,
Dude.
like I'm saying, if it's past 5 minutes, like I've had too much caffeine.
Yeah,
or
you're not going to sleep.
I see.
That's
if
how
I'm
I'm
not
with
asleep
TikTok.
within 5 minutes of watching disc golf, something's wrong.
Man, that must be nice.
It was, the other day I was watching TikTok, and I usually, my tell, so you said your tell is your iPad will fall on your chest. My tell is when I drop my phone, or if my phone slides like past my shoulder. But the other day I was laying on my side and I dropped my phone, and I don't know how, but it went like into my nightstand, and it was like just so loud. And Hannah jumped up and like pushed her, like got on top of me and was like, "Are you okay? What's going on? What's happening?" And I was like, I know, right? And I was like, everything's fine. I dropped my phone, and she goes, "Yeah, you did. Are you okay?" And I was like, this is so intense. The next day, she was like, "Man, I didn't wake up at all when you came in last night."
She didn't remember?
I know. And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And I was like, "Do you remember when I dropped my phone though, right?" And she's like, "What are you talking about?"
Oh my God,
So like
funny.
fully in her sleep, she like jumped up and she was like, "Are you okay? What is going on?"
That's hilarious.
Yeah, of course you dropped your phone, but are you okay? It was so intense.
Oh, that's awesome.
She's like right here. Then I was like, "Are you okay?" And she goes, "Yeah." And then she rolled over and goes to sleep. And so by that point, I was like, she's being goofy.
That's awesome.
Well, speaking of goofy, we're at the studio. We're with Steven today. Check out At the Garden Audio if you haven't already. And while you're at the socials, check out at SimplerPod. Give us a follow, give us a like. And like we said earlier, shoot us some messages. Shoot us your thoughts. Are you more of an Ezra, more of a Nehemiah? Has this given you some freedom in kind of how you feel within anger? Has this given you some direction? And then also for topics, like we're always looking for new topics to talk about, and we want to better serve the Simpler community. So at SimplerPod is a great avenue to do those and to send in those messages. Also, if you haven't subscribed or followed, go ahead and do that wherever you are. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Do the deal, man. Let's go.
The deal. There's your thing.
As always, keep Christ as core. What could be simpler than that? We'll catch you guys next week. Bye.